Hello all, and welcome to the 2023 Southeast Collaborative Online Conference. My name is Cindy Church, and I'll be your host for this session, Beyond Performance Reviews, Calibrating Talent to Grow a Stronger Leadership Timeline. This event is supported through funding from the Library Services and Technology Act through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Please feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat or interact with other attendees and the speaker within the Whova app for this presentation. And now I'd like to introduce Jay Turner. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us. Thank you all so much for having me here as a part of your SECC conference. It's my first time doing this, but in many ways, it's almost like coming back home. I've had a very interesting career in libraries. I started showing books at the ripe old age of 14 years old, and I remember back then I used to joke with my friends that I was going to become a librarian. Well, be careful what you joke about, because sometimes those things do become reality. I spent 17 years working in libraries, public libraries, and I wore almost every conceivable hat that you could think of, whether it was showing books, being a library assistant, a library associate, a reference librarian, and then I finally moved into training and work development. After I left the large suburban library system back in Atlanta, I became the Director of Continuing Education and Training at Georgia Public Library Service, in which I served in that role for almost 5 years. And then one day the Red Cross came knocking and they made me an offer that I could not refuse. So I went to spend the next 5.5 years with them, working in human resources and doing some leadership and work development work with them. After my time at the Red Cross, I joined the corporate sphere, and I worked for the second largest waste-to-energy company in the country, valued at $7 billion. Ultimately, it was just not the right move for me, and I said, you know what? My heart is still in libraries. Even though I had been gone out of libraries for almost 10 years, sometimes the library is like the mob, right? You try to get out, and you just can't quite escape it. So even though I do not work full-time for a library, I consider myself very fortunate to be able to speak at conferences, do workshops, and really help library systems get even better at delivering their mission in the community. We have a lot of ground to cover today as we think about how can we go beyond performance management so that we are ultimately calibrating talent and building a strong pipeline so that we can develop the kind of leaders that the 21st century library needs. I know we have about 55 minutes together today, and so I've laid out a roadmap on the screen for you here. We're going to start off by talking about the idea of talent bench strength. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but we're going to talk about what exactly does that mean. And then when you see that definition, you will see how does performance management really fit into that. And so I'll say this, a lot of libraries do performance management. It can be very hit and miss. Some libraries don't do it, but I'm going to break you off, I'm going to hook you up, and I'm going to help you understand, what are some of the best practices around getting the type of alignment with individual effort and the goals and the mission of the library so that they're measurable. You can also hold your people accountable. Once you've mastered performance management, then we get into that piece around talent calibration. Now, I'm guessing a lot of you haven't really heard of that, but we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details of how it all works. But that's the next level of performance management, when you're really getting your managers in a room to talk about, hey, where are our teams strong holistically? Where do we have some developmental areas? What are some of the talent needs for the organization? We're going to break all that down for you, talk about what exactly is talent calibration, and even how do you run a talent calibration meeting. And then finally, we only have 55 minutes. We're going to close some things out, but we're going to tie it all together, and you will see how these concepts relate to each other. So let's start off by talking about this idea of talent bench strength. When we're looking at talent bench strength, this is where we're trying to really do a few things for the organization. And this is one of those things that is easy to say in word, but very difficult to do in practice. It takes consistency, and it takes effort, and it takes a lot of buy-in from your executive leadership. But when you're looking at when you're looking at talent management in libraries, and that's the underpinning of that strategy, when you manage talent in a library, you're really focusing on growing your own and retaining those employees that are great, so that you have the right people in the right places at the right times. So here's the thing, right? I'm going to level with you. I spend a lot of time working online, and I'm a member of several online, very large social networking groups that are geared toward library people. And then I also have like a pretty big portfolio of large library clients. And I will tell you that there are a lot of challenges right now in the talent management space for libraries. So, when you're looking at libraries, this might even be happening where you work. You're probably seeing that there's a high degree of turnover in some of the lower paying positions. And then what I'm finding, when I'm doing some HR consulting for some of my clients, they're having a hard time sourcing roles where the responsibility is greater. The job market, the talent market for high performing talent, it's tough. It is very tough. And then also, when we're looking at some of the challenges that libraries themselves face as an organization, there's oftentimes inadequate or insufficient funding to really grow your professional development the way that you want. So that's what's happening on the organizational side, right? But we all know there's two sides to every story. And I would posit that the side that we hear from the people who work in libraries probably holds a little bit more weight. So when I'm looking at all these spaces online and social media, here's some of the things that I'm hearing around talent management. Folks are getting really frustrated by getting inconsistent feedback around their performance, and that's only if they're getting feedback at all. Feedback should be ongoing. And feedback shouldn't only be when we're slapping somebody's wrist, right? We should be leveraging teachable moments every day. If someone makes a mistake, if someone forgets something, hey, let's take a step back and let's think about what can we do more or less of it differently so that we don't do the same thing next time. Or if someone's doing an awesome job, how many times are people saying, hey, you know what, Jay, you did great. High five. We need to do more of that. And then another challenge that our library staff members are seeing is that there is a missing or very unclear path for how do we develop our careers in our current organization. And, and this is a real challenge because particularly many libraries have flattened their structure so much over the last 20 years that it becomes very difficult to have a very defined career path when there's not that much hierarchy. But there's hope, right? I believe that we should still think about how do we develop our people even if we can't guarantee they can slot in somewhere else. If we develop the skills of the people who work within our libraries, we want to keep them. That's a big part of talent management in libraries. But ultimately, if we can't keep them, let's grow them. Let's have them work hard for us. And if that means they have to go somewhere else for that career opportunity, you know what? We should be happy for them. And then finally, one of the other things I'm saying when it comes to some of the frustrations with staff in libraries is that there's a perceived bias toward who gets development funding and who doesn't. So as we talk through how do we manage our bench strength strategy, I'm going to be honest, right? And I'm going to level with you. I believe that every single person who works in a library deserves training, and they deserve to know how to do their job and how to do it well. But we all know that there is a finite amount of money for ongoing in-depth development. And really, when you're looking at the strategy around talent management and building that bench, the people who are high performing and high potential, they tend to get more of the developmental dollars. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. All right, so in order to bring your talent bench strength strategy to life, there are three main underpinnings that have to happen so that we can really have that strategy where we are retaining the right people in the right places at the right times, right? We want to hang on to the great folks. And if we want to have that kind of strategy, these are three things that need to be happening very well. First and foremost, performance management. We really need to be thinking about, what are the best ways that we can have our employees set goals that align to objectives and key results for the library. We need to be able to clarify expectations with our staff members if we are people leaders. And also, if you're a staff member and if you're having a challenge working with your manager, there is a respectful way for you all to get some alignment. And so we need to make sure that we're doing that. And then finally, when it comes to performance management, we need to make sure that we're doing this ongoing, continually, but we're also giving people feedback, positive, negative, indifferent, teachable moments. We need to give that feedback. And one of the things that motivate people a lot is just getting recognition. Sometimes it's not about the money. Sometimes it's, hey, you did a great job. Kudos. We master performance management. Then we move to that next level, and that's talent calibration. Talent calibration is where you're bringing the heads of your branches or your departments together to sit in a room, and they talk about, okay, what does it mean to have someone who has exceptional performance? What does it mean to have someone who has satisfactory performance? What does it really mean to have someone who has unsatisfactory performance? And what are the criteria to put them in a pit? I'm going to pause here. Does your library do that? See, typically what I find is that performance management happens in a vacuum. But when you get the talent calibration, you're calibrating, you're benchmarking, you're bringing the leaders together to make sure that we're being more objective in the way that we are giving ratings to employees. Now, beyond just assigning ratings inside of that talent calibration part, there is a piece to that called a 9-box. Some of you may be familiar with that term, but I'm going to walk you through a very simple 9-box. And a 9-box really plots out graphically where do you fit in terms of performance and potential. And then finally, once you get through talent calibration and you have a really good sense of who your high performing and high potential talent is, that's where we start thinking about how can we get these people some targeted development plans, right? Because we need to know if there are positions coming available, if this person is really strong in these areas but they have a gap in this area, hey, let's target it. Let's help this person lean into their strengths. But we also want to make sure that, if by chance they get this new position, that they're not walking into it with a blind spot. I have a high potential, high performance development plan sample that's a part of this presentation. I'll walk you through it. And again, everything that you're getting inside of this presentation, you'll have my slides, and then also for that high performance development plan, you'll have a copy of that too, along with the 9-box. All right, let's rock and roll. It is time for us to talk about performance management and what are some of those best practices. Remember, when it comes to the underpinnings of our strategy, you have to do performance management really well before you can even think about stacking and going to talent calibration. So I'm a huge fan of author, thinker, management guru. He also passed relatively recently, Peter Drucker. And Peter Drucker would say, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And so I really believe that if we're trying to get a talent bench strength strategy in place, it's important that we do it and we do it well. And in order to have performance management at its base, there's a broad collection of activities that you have to do and really maximize and master so that you can continue to get better and better and move along the performance management continuum. So when we talk about performance management, and exactly, well, hey, what is it? Performance management is a really broad collection of activities that's geared toward aligning employee behaviors and goals with those of the organization. Now, I know that some libraries, when they do performance management, there might be, just an evaluation at the end of the year. And you might have some managers who are really consistent about doing them. You might have some managers who are not. But when we're really doing performance management, we're looking at it as an ongoing process. It's cyclical, and it has many phases. So I want to talk really briefly about the difference between performance management and performance appraisal before we talk about the continuum of performance management. So when we're looking at performance management versus a simple performance appraisal, first and foremost, you're going to notice that performance management is ongoing. Like I said, it's a cycle. When you're doing performance appraisals, hey, the end of the fiscal year comes up, you and your manager, you sit down, you write your review, and that's it. It's a one-time, one-off kind of event. Now, I've worked in organizations where you get that, and while it is indeed simple, when you're doing that as a one-time event, oftentimes you're missing some of that feedback that can help you become even better as a worker or even better as a professional and help you grow your career. So that's why I'm a huge fan of having ongoing performance management. The second thing about performance management is that it looks forward. We're looking to align our goals, our workplace behaviors, our competencies toward what's coming up. What are the big goals of the library? And then, what are those objectives and key results that are going to help the branches, the managers, and the staff members start making their way toward their goals? So it's really perspective. When you're looking at performance appraisals, you're just looking back at what somebody did, right? We're looking back at, hey, what did this person do during the previous fiscal year? Were they good? Were they bad? Do they deserve a carrot? Should I hit them with a stick? So when you're doing performance appraisals, you're definitely always looking back. And then another great thing about performance management, and this is where kind of like strategic HR and strategic org development comes into place, it's ongoing. If you're managing performance and doing it well, you're going to get a real good sense of where's our organization strong, where are the weak points, what do we need to hire for, how many people are turning over during that current fiscal year. But when you look at performance appraisals, they're just about correcting action. Hey, you do good, kudos, right? If you don't do such a good job, you might get put on a PIP or you might get some kind of formal warning, and that's never a good feeling to have. And then last thing, and we go back to this really big, and you're going to see this in some of the sample forms that I put out, but performance management is all about planning and goal setting with a big focus on alignment. How can the individual align their efforts to help, the branch or the department hit their key results, which again helps raise the boat for the organization. Oftentimes when we're doing performance appraisals, it's just about the rating. Typically, it's a 5-point scale. Hey, they got a 1, they stuck to their job. They got a 5, they were pretty good. They got a 3, hey, it's cool enough, you get your performance. You might get your cost of living or your merit bonus, right? So we've all been in these situations. Again, the key here is let's elevate the game. So when we look at performance management as a continuum, and you'll see it up here on your screen, the top of the process really starts with the manager and their staff members having a conversation, one-on-one conversations, where the manager and the staff member are agreeing on what are going to be the goals for this year. And one thing you're going to see with a best practice is whenever an employee makes a goal and they make a SMART goal, there's always success measures tied to those goals. But beyond the goals at the top of the process, let's talk about, how does the manager want you to show up and show out on a daily basis at work? And likewise, what are the things that you're going to need from your manager for support to make sure that you're able to not only do your job adequately, but I'm sure that you're like many people. Like librarians, we love doing what we do. So you want to get in there, you want to rock on. So part of that conversation, it really needs to be a two-way conversation, a collaborative. Now, when we think about the performance management process, you start with the goal planning, and of course, if you've done this before, you get to like your mid-year evaluation. Typically, mid-year evaluations don't have any kind of final numbers. It's just a check-in to see, hey, staff member, how are you progressing, with the goals that you have in place? I also think that your mid-year evaluation is a great spot for you and your manager to take a look. It's been 6 months. I mean, are your goals still relevant? Do they need to be tweaked? This is a really good time to make sure that oftentimes the work that we do is a moving target, and there's nothing wrong with adjusting the goals that you have in place. You will notice here that between performance planning and goal setting and the mid-year evaluation, there's this big old bubble here for ongoing feedback. This is where we really need our managers to do a great job of being a coach. And we all know that coaching really accomplishes two things. Hey, if someone has a performance issue, you coach for performance. If someone really has some things they want to do developmentally for their career, hey, manager, you need to be trying to coach this person up and help be a resource to help them be best positioned for where they want to be with their career. And again, teachable moments also go inside of this place where we have the ongoing feedback. Another thing too, if you catch someone doing good, if someone's coworkers say, hey, James done a great job, or the director says, Bob did a great job, hang on to those emails. And then when you do your evaluation, not only should you have a file for all the things that someone did right, hey, if someone needs some improvement, you need to have a file on that too. The last thing that we want is to get to a point where we're having any kind of evaluation, even if it's the mid-year and there's no rating. We want to make sure that everything's documented. That's only fair, right? I mean, think about it. If you are a manager, wouldn't you want your one-up manager to do the same thing? We should never be surprised at our evaluations. Mid-year, end-of-year, there should never be surprises. So after we get through the mid-year eval, obviously, toward the end of the fiscal year, you have your annual performance review. This is where the manager and the staff member sit down. They talk about, hey, here's what worked really well. Here's what you could have done better. Did you meet your goals? If so, kudos. If not, well, why not? What percent complete did you get? What were the barriers? And of course, if we're doing a good job as manager and staff member, before we even get to that annual review, we should be having conversations. Hey, if I'm a staff member and I've been charged with a project and I'm finding that the going is really slow on a project and it's because it's too hard, or maybe it's because I can't get people to participate with me, maybe it's under-resourced, as a staff member, I have a responsibility to go to my manager and say, hey, boss, let's talk about some of the roadblocks that I have. Let's talk about how this is impacting the project. And boss, what can you do to help me remove some of these roadblocks? Again, remember, ongoing feedback is two ways. That might be a different way for some people to think about it, but I totally believe in crucial conversations. Whether it is you as a staff member or as a manager, hey, you have to have these hard conversations if you want to get real results. I'm going to show an example here of what the performance management continuum might look like on a timeline. So I know that some libraries, some organizations, they do rolling performance evaluations. I just happen to be a fan of doing them uniformly. I know a lot of our libraries are on a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year. I just really believe that if you do uniform performance evaluations, hey, I get it. The managers are going to be swamped trying to do 14, 15 evaluations all at once because the review period all kind of comes up and we're busy, right? Sorry, I'm a little stuffy. But there's a real benefit to doing your performance eval in a uniform fashion. And that is because when you do evolve to a place where your organization is doing talent calibration, you're able to accurately get a snapshot in time of all the people who've been reviewed. Now think about that. If you have a rolling performance management cycle, hey, you can do your talent calibration meetings, but you might miss some people because they haven't been reviewed yet. So again, hey, I'm all about Occam's razor. Let's just try to be uniform. Let's try to keep it simple. So if you look at the timeline here, the way that often this works, and this is nothing new for you, you might establish your performance expectations in July. There's some notes over here, and I'm not going to read this. It'll all be inside of the handouts that I give. But hey, this is where the manager, the employee, they sit down, they talk about expectations, talk about goals. You see, that happens in July. So between the place where we do our mid-year check-in in January, there really should be some ongoing and robust performance support. These are things like ongoing coaching, providing feedback. Are you making time to have one-on-ones with the people on your team? If not, you need to do that. How often are you having team meetings so that the team is always on the same page about who's on first, who's on second? We've got to do that. And of course, if you're doing these kind of check-ins, then that helps ensure that your staff members never are surprised when anything comes up in the formal evaluation. Mid-year check-in, January, ain't nothing to see here. You've been there, you've done that. The main thing to remember here is there's usually no formal ratings assigned. Now, between January and the end of that fiscal year, of course, you want to make sure that you're still doing that ongoing performance support. The only thing that I add at this point, since your employee will have been working with their goals for about 6 months, this is a really good time to pause, take a step back, and see, are these goals still relevant to what I'm looking for my staff member? Okay, so here's another thing that I really believe in as a best practice for performance management. How many of you all work in an organization where every employee, it doesn't matter their level of responsibility, that every employee has the same evaluation form? I can tell you from my career in libraries and even in other professions that typically was the case. Usually there's a performance eval form and everybody's got the same thing. Well, folks, when I work with my clients, I really try to encourage them to differentiate the way they do eval forms, as best as possible. Now, look, I get it. That can be really time consuming, and depending on how much differentiation you want to have, you could be splitting hairs. But one thing that I do think that you could do, just as a way to start out, and again, we differentiate these evaluation forms as a way to really set a baseline and a really good foundation for talent calibration. But if you are new to making different eval forms for the folks on your team, I say think of it like this. If you have managers who manage people or programs, this is kind of like some of the core things that will be on their evaluation. You'll notice that I have some leadership competencies here. If your library has cultural values, and oftentimes, libraries don't even put the cultural values on the evaluation. I don't even know why, but it's a good thing to do that. You want to make sure that people are behaving the way that you want your culture to show up. But leadership competencies, culture, performance goals, 3 to 4. We don't want people to have too many goals. You have too many, you can't be effective. Also, if you manage people or if you manage a program, you should also have some development goals. I believe that the sweet spot for developmental goals is when a person's aspirations and their passions and where they want to learn can be aligned somehow, some way with the work that the library is doing. Now, I also want to say, too, that I have no problem with people growing just for the sake of growing. Now, if we don't have a seed garden at our library and then someone wants to go take a horticulture class, I mean, that's a big H no. I mean, that doesn't make much sense to me. However, if you have someone who wants to learn Python as a programming language, and even if you all are not using Python right now, I mean, that's a skill that could be reused, right? Your library might need that in the future, and the person who's taking the Python class could be teaching that to other staff members, or maybe even making a team event on Python for Dummies, right? You see how that all kind of stacks up? So beyond an eval form for your people and your program managers, now let's start thinking about the folks who work in the library full-time, but they don't manage people. And you'll see that their eval doesn't look way too different than the people managers, but notice here, we're not weighing them in on leadership competencies. There are some core job behaviors that I have pulled, and I typically use these from the Society of Human Resources Management, SHRM. And I like to, list out about 12 or 13 core job behaviors. I'm going to show you a couple of these eval forms. You can adapt these behaviors as much as you see fit. Edit them. I have no sense of ownership. Change them, tweak them, delete them. All good by me. But you'll also notice that your full-time non-managers are also being evaluated on cultural values, 3 or 4 performance goals, and development goals. Now, here's going to be a little bit of a radical difference for some folks. I know that a lot of libraries have part-time people. I know that a lot of people who work part-time, they may have aspirations to become full-time at the library. Some people work part-time at the library just because they like to work at the library. They might not have any aspiration to do anything else besides show up to work and do a good job. You'll notice that their evaluation form is pretty different than the other ones. So the core job behaviors, still the same. We do expect them to do, great work. There's great output of work. They communicate well. They meet deadlines, things of that nature. So those core job behaviors stay the same. The cultural values stay the same, because whether you are a people manager, a full-time staff member, or even a part-timer, we expect you to uphold the library's culture in every single interaction that you have. Internal customer, external customer, you have to live those values. But hey, check me out. Here's where things get a little different. When I do this, I say, hey, a part-timer does not necessarily have to have goals for the library. You see these performance goals? What I want from my part-timers, I want people who are reliable, who are going to go in, do the work, do a great job, and go home, chill, and enjoy their life. I don't necessarily think that part-timers have to have development goals. So when I do these evaluation forms for some of my clients, I make a recommendation that, hey, your part-timers don't need to have performance goals. But check this out. We make it optional for them to have development goals. Why do we do this? Because some part-timers really do aspire to do more at the library. And so, when you are a manager and you're at the top of that performance management cycle and you're having that one-on-one conversation, that's a great time to check in, with your part-time. Hey, it's a great time to check in with any of your staff members, but particularly your part-timers. See if they have any aspiration to become full-time. If so, what kind of work do they want to do for the library? If they have that aspiration as a manager, as someone who coaches for development, you should be trying to help them, be best positioned for, being considered a serious candidate. And again, this goes back to your talent bench strategy, right? If you've got someone who's a part-timer, they're reliable, they've got really great potential, I mean, wouldn't you want to promote that person and give them a chance? Yeah, totally agree. Okay, so differentiated evaluations, I think they're great. I'm going to hop over and just show you really quickly what this can look like. Now, the forms I'm going to show you, I just made these in a notepad. When you get these resources, if I have no sense of ownership. If you want to use these, knock yourself out. If you don't, it's just another way of looking at performance management forms. All right, so in the interest of time, and just because I'd like for you to have something interactive to do when this is over, I'm going to invite you to actually independently explore the differentiated forms I put together. Again, I have no sense of ownership. If you see anything on these forms that you think might be interesting for your own performance management cycle, feel free to use it. If you want to tweak something, change something, knock yourself out. A couple of callouts, you will notice that there is a 3-point rating system. And then also when we look at the competencies that are assigned to our people and program managers, those 12 competencies actually pull from Korn Ferry's Leadership Architect. Korn Ferry is an executive search firm and also a research company, and they specialize in leadership development. I'm certified to coach in their model, and whenever I do anything around leadership development for libraries, typically I'm using the Korn Ferry Leadership Architect model. So there are 12 competencies there. Feel free to take a look. And remember, there's a big difference between the forms for your people managers, your program managers, and your full-timers versus your part-timers. Have fun exploring those. All right, so we made it. We've made it through best practices in performance management. Now we're about to take it one step further. We're about to level up, talk a little bit about this alien concept of talent calibration. So you're probably wondering, what the heck is talent calibration? So talent calibration is a process, again, where you're bringing in the leaders and managers of your business units to sit down and have a frank conversation and a very candid conversation around the talent not only on their teams, but the talent within that business unit. I believe I previously mentioned, in libraries you might find that when you're doing talent calibration discussions for your branches, if you have 20 branches and and you have 5 branches that serve like one region, you might have one calibration meeting for those 5 branches. And then if you have like another 5 branches that serve like the south side of your county or the south side of your city, you might have a calibration discussion around that. So you have these smaller calibration discussions, and then we're going to talk about, well, what happens to level that up. But when we discuss talent calibration, this is really all about getting your leaders and your managers in a room, and you're having a really good discussion around who's your top talent. So Rick Riordan has a quote, and I know that this may rub some people the wrong way, because typically when we look at learning and development in libraries, we oftentimes have like a pot of money or certain opportunities, and we try to make sure that everyone gets access to it. Again, I go back to, remember, I was a training manager. I also ran training for a state library. I did training for a $7 billion company. I hold this truth to be self-evident, okay? So as Rick Riordan says, fairness is not about everyone getting the same thing. Fairness is about everyone getting what they need. What I believe here is that, when you are able to identify your top talent, your high potentials and your high performers, you may want to look at differentiating your learning budget to support the development on 2 levels, all staff and then the people that you've identified as your top talent. And we're going to talk about some of those recommendations of how you can really get some targeted development to the people who've been identified as top talent. But also, really, talent calibration is just conversations. It's getting us to sit down and talk candidly about, hey, as a business unit, where are we strong? Where are we weak? Who are our top stars? Who are our underperformers? If we have underperformers, can we coach them up to really try to get them to a solid level of performance? Have they been underperforming so long and they don't want to improve? Well, we might need to love them enough to love them out of their organization. So there's a ton of benefit. To using this talent calibration process. And I've just kind of put this up on the screen here. Again, we go back to our talent bench strategy. and calibration supports that. So if your library is really true about committing to trying to make sure that we keep our great talent so that we don't suffer knowledge loss, and that we can grow from within, these are all the things to make sense, right? I mean, you're able to identify the strong and the weak benches, not only in your departments and your branches, but overall for your library system. When you get people together and you get them out of their vacuum for evaluating employees, you get some calibration consistency, because now you're having to have managers have conversations around, here's why I rated this person this way, here's why you rated this person this way. Let's have a conversation around, like, what does it truly mean to exceed expectations, right? When you have these calibration discussions, obviously, we want to grow these people, we want to develop them, we want to get a sense of how ready they might be to make a career move, because ultimately, if you're top talent, we want to keep you. It is significantly cheaper from an organizational perspective to retain your top talent than to have to go and recruit new people. And then lastly, there's a lot of things on here, but if you're doing your calibration sessions, and if you make this a part of your yearly culture, along with performance management, if you're doing performance management, and then if you're doing talent calibration on top of it, you're going to have a really good idea around the snapshot of talent in your organization. If you're strong in some areas, you're good to go. If you are weak in some areas, or if you're understaffed in some areas, that's where you want to spend your very limited recruitment dollars. So there are 3 parts to the talent calibration process. There's the 9 box, and I'm pretty sure most of you have heard about this term, like the 9 box. And essentially, you are looking at all the people on your team and all the people in the organization, and you are putting them on a box that says, hey, Jay's a solid performer, or hey, Cindy is a rising star, or hey, Bob is a low performer and we need to put him on a PIP, or just make sure that he's in the right job, right? We'll look at a 9 box momentarily. The 9 box is filled out. If you're doing calibration, you actually complete the 9 box immediately after you complete an employee's evaluation. That way the data is fresh in your mind. So for instance, if I'm doing a performance evaluation for Cindy, and I've rated Cindy as being a 3. She's exemplary at her work. And then when I think about the work that Cindy has done longitudinally, hey, the last 5 years, she's been a rock star. With that information in mind, the current performance eval, and then I look back in my files and I see that she's been rocking it for 5 years, I have no problem saying that, Cindy's a rock star, right? So you do your 9 box evaluations at the site, right after you do your performance reviews. I get it. This is a lot of work, but the way that you really make an organization stronger, it ain't easy. You have to invest the time. You have to prioritize the time to really maximize your talent. After you do your 9 box assessments, and every manager should be doing this at least for their full-time employees, there are different ways you can cascade talent calibration in your organization. I think it makes a lot of sense to, just kind of start with your managers and your full-timers. It's a really simple way to start. But after you do your 9 boxes, then you move into these calibration discussions. And again, this is where your business units connect, and they have frank and candid conversations about, hey, who's our top talent? Who's high potential? Who's high performing? What strengths do we have, overall within all the branches in the system? What strengths do we have overall in the entire library system? Where are we weak, right? These calibration discussions are going to help you identify where that is. And then the third step inside of that calibration process is making targeted development plans for your top talent. When I say top talent, that's going to be your people who've been identified in the talent pipeline. There are 3 boxes on the 9 box to put them there. And your top talent, should have a very specialized individual development plan. Got to get to that all in just a moment. And because I am your easy button, I've already put together an individual development plan that I've used with multiple clients. You know what? I'm in a giving mood. I'm gonna give it to you. So as a part of like the resources that you have here today, you can look at the individual development plan that I use for my clients. Beg, borrow, steal, while reinvent the wheel. I got you. Okay, so let's just kind of unpack the talent calibration process really quickly, and then we will move on. As my boy Matthew McConaughey would say, all right, all right, all right. Now we get into the good stuff. The 9 box. Love it, hate it. There's some utility here, right? Again, I'll be the first to say that there can be a high degree of subjectivity in a 9 box. There are ways that I help my clients coach as much of that subjectivity out of the process. That's a different story for a different time. If you find that you really want to stand up talent calibration, from the meetings to the 9 box, you can always reach out to me and I can give you, more targeted assistance. But just want to get to the 9 box in general so you can see what this looks like. So your 9 box is going to be a place where you're plotting your employees' performance versus potential. Now, what do we mean by performance? Performance is results and behaviors. Like we care about what you produce, but we also care about how you produce it. If you've done exceptional work, but you've done it by beating down the people that you manage, that's not good. That's not high performance, right? So your results are going to be your accomplishments and the achievements that you've delivered in your role. Again, your behaviors or how you did that. Oftentimes, organizations look at when someone was doing their work and they were executing these key behaviors, were they in line and being an exemplar about organizational cultural values? You see, all of this is so interconnected, it's so related. So you'll see here on the screen, when we look at performance, there are 3 gradations of this. There's high, there's medium, there's low. I just want to talk through it really quickly. So if someone is high performing, that means that longitudinally, over a period of time, this person is someone that you consider one of the best at what they do in terms of execution and getting results, right? And then they also, again, behaviors. Not only do they get great results, people look at them as a great leader. That's someone who's high performing. The next level is medium. So if you're a medium performer, that means, hey, you know what? You consistently perform as expected. On occasion, you might rocket, hit a home run, and exceed results. And then from a behavior perspective, you moderately exhibit some of the key leadership behaviors. Again, those leadership behaviors can be the leadership competencies that we've mapped out in our performance review plans, as well as cultural values. Keep that in mind. And then if someone's a low performer, hey, I hate to talk about it, but we got to talk about it, right? That means that someone's really inconsistent with their performance. They don't necessarily deliver results as you expect them to. They probably don't show up very well as a leader. You know what? I'm going to call truth to power, okay? If you have someone on your team, and I get it. Sometimes we have a bad year. We might have a bad quarter. But if you have someone on your team who is consistently low performing, you are not doing your organization or your team any favors by hanging on to low performers. Here's the thing. I believe in loving people. And sometimes people are just not the right fit for the job role, okay? So if you have someone who is low performing in their job role, hey, let's be a good leader. Let's see if there's value that they can bring in another job in the organization. Now, I'm not giving you permission to say, you know what, I hate this person on my team, so we're going to ship them off to cataloging, right? We don't do that. I'm literally saying, take a look at the person. Take a look at where they're strong. See if there's a fit for them. If it is, give them another shot. But if you give them another shot and they're still low performing, Don't hang on to dead weight. Document, and then love them enough to love them out the door. Okay, let's talk about potential. So potential is really all about, hey, does somebody want to make that next move? Do they have the ability, the desire, and are they fully engaged with the organization? And what I mean by fully engaged is this someone who goes above and beyond the call of duty to help the branch or the department or the library, meet its mission? Engagement is defined by how willing is someone to go above and beyond, right? So there's some definitions here that kind of operationalize what we mean by ability, desire, and engagement. You can look again on the rating scale. Potential, 3-point rating, just like performance. There's high, there's medium, there's low. In general, someone who's a high potential, they operate at the highest level of their current work, and you can easily see them operating one level higher than where they are. For someone who is medium potential, hey, you know what? They do good in their position. They may be able to handle the work of going up a level, but they need some seasoning. As my son says, hey, you gotta let them cook. And then someone who has, low potential, they're just not there yet. They might struggle to perform. They might not know what they want to do with their career. If someone on your team doesn't know what they want to do on their career, it is your job as a leader to help them figure it out, right? And I want to mention this too. When it comes to performance and potential, and we put this on a 9 box, this is a snapshot in time. Just because someone lands somewhere on the 9 box for this fiscal year, it doesn't mean they stay there. Hey, I've seen rock stars go from being at the top and then struggle really, really badly, and they just become solid. You have to do this consistently, and you have to be as objective as possible so that you can have a good longitudinal sense of where our pipeline is. So when you graph performance and potential together, you get this. You get a 9 box. This is a 9 box that I put together for a previous organization. You'll notice that when you do the research, a lot of the headings for these boxes tend to be the same. The definitions are what's most important. Here's the thing. You can't just put a heading in a 9 box and then let people guess what it means. As with anything that comes down to performance and potential, you have to operationalize it, right? Because if we don't have a rubric, if we don't have success measures, if we don't have good definitions, how are you really going to say that somebody's a solid performer, right? How are you really going to say that somebody's a star performer? You can't do it. So again, this is something that I put together for a previous client. Feel free to look at it. These things tend to be very different. The definitions tend to be very different between organizations, even though the headings might stay the same. Here's what's important for me to call out on your 9 box. You'll notice that we have different colors here. Your talent pipeline, like the people that you really want to be thinking about, how do you develop them the best, these people are going to be your green boxes, okay? Folks who are strong performers, star performers, and emerging star performers, those are going to be, that's your talent pipeline. If you do any kind of differentiated learning and professional development, these are the people who get the individualized development plan that's all about developing their leadership potential. All right, check this out. These yellow boxes, ain't nothing wrong with these folks. Nothing wrong with them, right? There might be some things that you want them to shore up on, but all in all, these are people who perform pretty well. Except like your potential performer, they might be new to the job. You see some strength in them. You think, if you let them cook for a little bit, they might show up and they might move from a potential performer to a key performer. These yellow folks, it's all good. If they want to be better and if they want to make improvements, help them. But if not, there's nothing wrong with just having people who are really good at what they do. Now, here's where things get a little dicey. steady performers, hey, we like steady performers. But we also want to make sure that we push our steady performers. So notice that your steady performer and your questionable performers are starting to get here toward yellow. And if you're looking at a rainbow, of course, orange is closer to red. These people, your steady performers and your questionable performers, sometimes they have a tendency over time to slip. So you might notice that a steady performer, if they've been with you for a while, if they start becoming disengaged, if there's a major change in their life or library leadership or something that they don't agree with, they get moved to another location. Some of these things that change the way that they feel fundamentally they're being taken care of, your steady performer might slip to a questionable performer. Now, here's where we got to have this conversation. Let's talk about your people in the low performer box. All right, we're separating the wheat from the chaff. Again, people can have bad years. They can have bad quarters. I'm going to tell you a story. Many years ago, my oldest son was 15 years old. We found out that he had a very rare brain tumor. Now, I'm someone who normally is working. If I'm not a strong performer, I tend to be pretty solid. There have been times where I've been like a star. When this happened, I was performing very strongly, but I had this personal event happen in my life. My kid, my oldest son, got a brain tumor. We bring our whole selves to work, okay? People say check your emotions out the door. Sometimes you just can't do it. I had a hard time struggling in a project management role when that happened. I went from being strong to low performer. Now, an emotionally intelligent leader who knows their people, that leader can sometimes spot when someone has dropped that drastically in their performance, and they can figure out, okay, you know what? That's not how Jay operates. What's one of the 4 foundational human needs that we're not meeting for him? Does he feel that he can't trust us? Does he feel that we're not giving him the training that he needs? Does he not feel supported? I felt very confident and truly blessed that when I was in that position, the VP of HR at the organization I was with at the time, she called me to her office and she just knew. She just said, "Hey Jay, I know this is not how you operate, but your work sucks right now. Like, what's going on? Just tell me what's going on." And boom, the tears started flowing, and I started telling her about my son, his brain tumor. He spent 6 months in ICU. But there's a happy ending to this story, right? That gave me and my VP an opportunity to really talk about what were my strengths, okay? When I started working at that organization, I was brought in to do project management for learning systems. I'm good at that. I'm good at learning systems. I'm not necessarily the best project manager. But she recognized the way that I worked with a lot of our executives and the way that I would informally coach and mentor some of our rising talent. And, she looked, and again, look down here. When you look at these definitions for low performer, it's possible that I was just in the wrong role. And she says, "Hey, Jay, if you want to go back to project management, I'll put you there. But I really think that you'll shine best and brightest in leadership development." And that was the beginning of my career in leadership development. Now, of course, I turned things around. I went from being a low performer back to a star. I think this shows a lot of things, right? We bring our whole selves to work. Our placement on a 9 box is temporary. But as a leader, you have to take the time to know your people and recognize that just because someone is a rock star one day or because someone sucks one day, we need to understand the root cause and try to do our best to support them before we realize and say you're a rotten apple. The last thing I want to touch on, because I know that our time here is really short, again, I'm going to let you explore this independently, but after you have identified your top talent and you have calibration meetings to really understand who's the top talent, and you also have an opportunity to look at your business unit and think about where we're strong and where we're weak, You want to go back to your top talent folks, your strong performers, your star performers, your emerging star performers, and then give them targeted. In addition to identifying performance and potential, you will also need to think about the readiness level an employee has for taking on different roles which may be within their current function or other functions. Once readiness has been identified, consider what development the employee needs for their career. You will find below some questions to consider when establishing the readiness level of an employee. Readiness is defined as an employee's ability to move into a role of larger scope and responsibility. Ask yourself the following. Which roles might this person be able to assume, and when will they have the ability, a skill set, and capabilities to assume that role? Which roles at higher levels within their current function can they develop into, and which roles within other functions might they be ready for? Does the employee exhibit the traits and characteristics needed to move up in the organization, and what are the critical competencies for those roles? What actions need to be taken for this person's development to bring them to a level of readiness? Use the rating scale below to indicate readiness. Talent calibration discussions are used to normalize performance ratings and agree upon final 9-box placements by ensuring that all managers are using a consistent and fair approach when evaluating their employees. In these meetings, managers typically discuss and compare the performance of their team members, taking into account factors such as individual contributions, job requirements, and team dynamics. By having these discussions, managers can better understand the strengths and weaknesses of each employee and ensure that their evaluations are consistent with those of other managers. Once the managers have reviewed and discussed the performance of their team members, they can then use this information to agree upon final 9-box placements. By normalizing performance ratings and agreeing upon final 9-box placements, talent calibration meetings can help libraries ensure that they are making objective, data-informed decisions about staff and that they are maximizing the potential of their employees. These meetings can also help to promote transparency, fairness, and consistency in the evaluation and development of employees. After managers complete the 9-box assessments for their exempt employees, they should work with HR to coordinate and facilitate 2 levels of talent calibration conversations at varying levels within the organization. The first calibration meetings are usually with branch manager and their appropriate administrative executive, such as the Director of Public Services. Calibration meetings can take place over the span of several weeks, and if you have many branches, you might consider doing them by region or branches within close geographic proximity to each other. During the calibration meetings, managers will review and validate their 9-box assessments. The objectives of these discussions are to review employees assessed on the 9-box grid and gain consensus on each employee rating, finalize the assessment of each employee, identify high potential employees, review the overall talent levels in the business unit, discuss development needs for employees. At the conclusion of these talent calibration discussions, the managers will have updated their respective 9-box assessments and will have identified their high potential employees rated in the star performer, emerging star performer, or strong player boxes. Finalized 9-box assessments and key takeaways will cascade up the appropriate administrative leader of branches. Key takeaways should include an emphasis on high potential talent. Admin units should follow the same process with an emphasis, when possible, on calibrating, like business units together. For instance, if your organization splits part of payroll with HR and the other part with finance, you could consider calibrating these units together. Once all of the business unit talent calibration meetings are completed, the executive leadership team will conduct the final calibration discussions with the executive leadership team. During this final calibration meeting comprised of the executive team, all staff will be viewed on the 9-box grid. However, an emphasis will be placed on high potential employee discussions. The executive team is responsible for signing off on the calibrated final 9-box ratings for staff. Once the 9-box placements have been vetted and agreed upon, the admin team and select department heads will collectively discuss potential candidates ready for career moves and talent pools and development opportunities for these other high potential employees. Once the talent calibration discussions with the executive leadership team conclude and high potential talent has been identified, those in the highest 3 boxes of the high potential should receive a debrief of their rating from their manager. While all full-time staff are typically calibrated, during the discussions only the high potentials will get a debrief. The data and notes on the remaining folks are used for business purposes only.
Those staff members identified as high potential talent will use highlights from their debrief to co-create a high potential individual development plan with their manager. Their plan will cover positions within the organization of interest, leadership and career goal examples, strengths and developmental needs, specific development actions and success factors that relate to identified goals. As goals and interests tend to change over time, what the high potential development plan is treated as a living document meant to be updated periodically and prior to the next annual talent calibration process.
So here is a high potential, high performing individual development plan that I use with people that I coach. Of course, there's the basic information. Hey, what's your name? What's your job title? Who do you work with? But we start getting into some things that are really meaty, and I want to go over these really quickly. So after you get the basic information, let's talk about creating your SMART goals. Now, I know a lot of us already know how to make SMART goals. When you use this form, and I give you totally free permission to use this form, there's a video embedded that talks about how do you write really good SMART goals. So you do that. That's foundational, right? Goals have to be tight. And then there's this thing called the 70-20-10 model for development. Hey, a lot of libraries spend a lot of money on training people. But did you know that formal learning only accounts for 10% of how we learn? 70% of what we learn and the most effective things we learn by experience. And then 20% we learn by social relationships with our peers, coaches, and mentors. This video talks you through the 70-20-10 model, but I really want to point this out because if your library has a budget crunch and you don't have a lot of money for professional development, you can be real creative with the 70-20. You can think about how can you curate and customize targeted experiential learning opportunities for those people in the green boxes. So once we get between the 70-20-10, now we start talking about, how do you make your plan of action? Hey, you can make a development plan, but if you're not going to be accountable to it, if there's not success measures, if there's not a place for you, like your manager or anybody else to give you some additional help, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So when we look at the action plan for a high potential, basic stuff, right? We give you room on this form to do I think it's like up to 5 development goals. The goals need to be SMART. You'll see that there's an example of like what a really tight, development goal looks like. And then we ask for a little bit more. We say, hey, if you have this development goal, let's talk about what strength areas this goal is supporting, as well as if you have opportunities for development, why are you choosing this goal and how will it help you become better at a place where you're struggling. And so you do this for up to 5 goals. I'm going to skip around a little bit. Same stuff, different day, just different goal numbers. But you'll notice for each goal there are success factors. We really want people to take the time to define, okay, if I have this SMART goal, how am I going to show my manager and executive leadership that I've been successful in doing this? The bottom line is, if you have been identified as top talent, if you cannot show and make a business case for why you were successful, you really might not be top talent. So really pay attention to this part because you have a story to tell. You have a story to tell about how you were successful. You also have a story to tell about, hey, how can I use this learning to help make the library even better? Alright, so we have just more development goals here. I believe there's just one more thing at the very end. And that is, you know what? It's been a while since I touched this. Hey, 5 development goals. Don't take too many goals on. If you take on too many, you won't be successful. All I want to say in closing is having a talent bench strategy is so powerful. It's so relevant for libraries in these days. The job market is weird, and it is going to continue to be weird. It's always weird, right? but we also live in a time of permanent whitewater, where change is pervasive and paradigm busting. And we need leaders. We need to be developing flexible leaders with great learning agility, with the ability to be flexible as they need to be, so that they can be the kind of people that we need for the 21st century library. And I truly, truly, truly believe that if we take a differentiated approach to everything that we do, we can learn a whole lot better together.
Thank you, Jay, for being here today, and thank you everyone for attending our webinar. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the speaker or conference host using the Hula app. An evaluation is provided with the conference session resources, and we welcome your feedback about the session and the conference. Thanks, everyone, for making the 2023 Southeast Collaborative Conference successful. See you all next year.